The penthouse
Stop, please.
glowed like a
Let her
jeweled
go.
box suspended
I can't
above
breathe.
the sleeping city.
It's okay, I'm here.
Ryan thought as he watched his wife Sienna cross the marble floor in her crimson dress. Her dark hair cascaded in waves down her back, and her eyes sparkled with an electricity he recognized but no longer understood. She turned and caught him staring, then offered that smile, the one that had made him fall in love with her 7 years ago on a rooftop much like this one, but smaller, simpler, and entirely theirs. Tonight felt different, though. Ryan adjusted his charcoal suit jacket and tried to ignore the knot tightening in his chest. Sienna had insisted they come to this party, thrown by Marcus Chen, one of her most important corporate clients, a holiday celebration for the city's elite event planners, designers, and social movers, the kind of evening where Sienna became a different person, radiant, untouchable, effortlessly commanding every room, while he stood at the edges, nursing a drink and sketching architectural blueprints in his mind. She had been distant for months. Ryan knew it, and she knew it, and somehow that knowing made it worse. They barely touched anymore. Conversations died before they began. His late nights drafting renovation projects, her weekends consumed by client emergencies. They had stopped asking how the other's day went. They had simply stopped. The champagne flowed like water, and Sienna drank it like she was trying to fill a void. Ryan watched her from across the room as she laughed with a group of women, her friends from the event planning world, women he could barely name. They threw their heads back and their laughter cut through the jazz saxophone playing in the background. He found himself wondering if his own jokes ever made her laugh like that anymore. They did not. By midnight, Sienna had changed. She was more animated, more reckless, more alive than he had seen her in months. She kicked off her heels and danced barefoot on the polished floor while colleagues cheered. She spun until her dress became a blur of red. Light caught in her hair and her eyes were glassy with that particular shine that came from too much Dom Perignon and not enough food. Ryan crossed the room and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Sienna, honey, maybe we should slow down?" He said this quietly into the chaos of music and voices. She turned to him, and for a moment something flickered across her face, something like resentment or maybe sadness. "I am fine, Ryan. I am just having fun. Why do you always try to control everything?" She pulled away from him with a force that surprised him and disappeared into the crowd before he could respond. He stood frozen, holding the space where she had been. The music pulsed, the lights swirled, and Ryan felt something fundamental shift inside him, like a continental plate grinding against another, and he could not stop it. That was the last time he saw his wife for the next 8 hours. The hours that followed would haunt him for reasons he could not yet understand. For the rest of the night, Ryan moved through the party mechanically, accepting drinks he did not want and conversations he did not hear. He checked the main floor twice, then the kitchen, then the rooftop terrace, where winter air bit at his skin and the city sprawled below like a circuit board of light and shadow. Sienna was not there. By 3 a.m, panic had begun its slow crawl up his spine. He found Marcus by the bar. "Have you seen Sienna? Where is my wife?" Marcus looked confused, then alarmed. They searched together, the bedrooms, the private lounges, the spa in the lower level. Every shadow seemed to hold her, and held her not at all. Ryan checked his phone 17 times. She had not called, she had not texted. The radio silence screamed louder than any accusation ever could. When she finally appeared near dawn, she was standing by the main entrance, looking lost and broken and utterly foreign to him. Her crimson dress was torn at the hem, her bare feet were smudged with dirt, and her makeup was a dark, tragic painting across her face. Her hair hung limp and matted, and her eyes were empty as a house with all the lights burned out. She saw him and crumpled, gasping. "Ryan!"
She reached for him and he moved toward her, forgetting for one suspended moment to be angry, forgetting to be afraid, forgetting everything except that this woman was his wife and something terrible had happened to her. "What happened?" he whispered, pulling her into his arms. She was shaking violently. "I don't remember, Ryan. I don't remember anything." She buried her face in his chest, and he could feel her heart racing like a small animal trapped in a cage. The sky behind them was beginning to blush with the first hints of dawn, painting everything in shades of apology and dread. And in that moment, as he held Sienna while she wept against him, Ryan understood that their marriage had just entered a darkness from which there might not be a return. He understood that whatever came next would require a kind of forgiveness he was not certain he possessed. The lesson that morning became achingly clear. Neglect does not announce itself with trumpets. It creeps in quietly during long work hours and unspoken insecurities. It builds in the spaces between conversations, in the walls we construct when we stop trying to truly see each other. And when one person feels unseen for long enough, they begin to disappear into themselves, first and then into the night.
3 days had passed since Sienna came home shattered, and Ryan had barely slept. He lay in bed at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling while his wife whimpered softly beside him, her nightmare-induced crying having finally exhausted itself into fitful rest. Her therapist had prescribed sleeping pills, but Sienna refused them, claiming that surrender to numbness felt like betrayal of her own mind. Ryan rose quietly and moved to his home office, where he had begun what he could only describe as an investigation of his own marriage. A small cardboard box sat on his desk, containing the fragments of that night. His phone held screenshots of every photograph posted from the party. His laptop displayed browser tabs with articles about alcohol-induced blackouts and dissociative memory loss. He had even created a timeline written in his architect's precise hand, documenting every moment he could account for. The lipstick smudges on Sienna's dress haunted him most. They were a deep burgundy, almost purple, and nothing like the coral shade she favored. He had examined them under his desk lamp, rotating the fabric in the light like evidence at a crime scene. Then he had driven to 3 different makeup counters, asking salespeople if they could identify the brand. His behavior felt obsessive and shameful and absolutely necessary all at once. There was also the photograph, the one a guest named Jennifer had taken around 2:30 in the morning and posted to Instagram before deleting it 2 hours later. But Ryan had already screenshotted it. The image was blurry, shot through dim hallway lighting, but unmistakably Sienna. Her head was tilted back, her mouth open in laughter or pleasure or both, and she was leaning against a man whose face remained frustratingly obscured by shadow and angle. Only his shoulder was visible, the fabric of his dark suit jacket, and what appeared to be a wedding band catching the light. Ryan had stared at that photograph for approximately 740 minutes. He had also called 7 of Sienna's close friends, making excuses about wanting to thank them for coming to the party, then casually asking if they remembered who she had spoken to that evening. Most remembered her dancing. Most remembered her drinking. Most remembered her seeming happy, then sad, then angry, then euphoric in that manic way that too much alcohol produces. But nobody could tell him about the man. Nobody could place him. Nobody seemed to know anything useful. That morning at breakfast, Sienna sat across from him, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate with mechanical precision. She had lost weight in 3 days. Her skin had taken on a grayish tone, and her eyes were rimmed with dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide. "Ryan, I spoke to Dr. Morrison yesterday, my therapist. She thinks my blackout might be from something in my drink. Someone might have given me something without my knowledge." Ryan felt the room tilt. "What?" She did not meet his eyes, and that small act of avoidance said everything. She was suggesting drugging. She was suggesting assault, and he immediately felt like a monster for his investigation, for his doubt, for the photograph he kept returning to like a wound he could not stop picking. "I know you saw that picture. Jennifer sent it to me before she deleted it," Sienna continued, her voice trembling. "I remember someone pulling me. I remember feeling dizzy. I remember a hallway and music that sounded very far away, and then nothing. After that, there is only fog and darkness, like trying to see through water. Ryan moved around the table and knelt beside her, taking her small, cold hands in his. "We believe you, Sienna. I believe you." But even as he said the words, he was not entirely certain they were true, and that uncertainty was something darker and more corrosive than any infidelity could ever be. Sienna finally looked at him, and he saw the fear there, the genuine terror of a person whose own mind had become a stranger. "But what if I did something I cannot remember? What if something happened that I am not telling you because I cannot recall it? What if the person I was that night was someone you would not recognize?" That night, Ryan lay awake again, wondering if his wife had been assaulted, or if she had been unfaithful, or if perhaps both were true in some devastating overlap where blame became impossible to assign. Wondering if the distance that had grown between them for months had somehow created a space where danger could flourish, where a woman could disappear into her own life. The educational truth emerged quietly from this part, understanding that doubt is sometimes justified and sometimes corrosive, and that the most dangerous thing is not knowing the difference. Learning that when we fail to truly see our partners, we cannot protect them when they vanish into darkness. And learning finally that faith in a relationship means sometimes choosing to believe even when evidence seems murky and memory itself becomes the enemy.
2 weeks later, their apartment had become a war zone of unspoken accusations and desperate reconciliations. Ryan would return home from the architecture firm to find Sienna curled on the couch with her laptop open, watching videos of her own missing moments, searching for herself in photographs and social media posts, like a detective hunting a phantom. The wedding photographs on their hallway wall began to feel like relics from someone else's life, someone braver, someone less broken. One evening, Ryan found her in the shower at 11 at night, shouting through the glass barrier. "Sienna, come out here. We need to talk." She emerged, wrapped in a towel, her skin flushed and raw from scrubbing. "Talk about what, Ryan? More accusations? More doubt? I already told you I do not know what happened, and frankly, I am tired of being treated like a criminal in my own marriage." He grabbed her shoulders gently. "You think I want this? You think I enjoy feeling like this? Every time I close my eyes, I see that photograph. I see his wedding ring. I see you laughing, and I cannot stop wondering." She pulled away from him, and water dripped onto the tile floor. "That is not fair. You promised you believed me. You said you would stand with me, and instead you're investigating me like I'm some sort of suspect in a crime I did not commit." They fell into bed together later, tangled in sheets and desperation. Their lovemaking was raw and fierce, and somehow more violent than tender, as if they could physically reattach themselves to each other if they tried hard enough. His hands gripped her shoulders too tightly. Her nails left marks on his back. They moved together in a kind of controlled chaos, seeking forgiveness through friction, through sweat, through the most intimate act they still shared. Afterward, they lay in darkness, and Sienna whispered, "I called Detective Morrison today. She recommended I file a report about possible drugging, but I told her I could not, because to do that officially means admitting that something was done to me, something I did not consent to, and that feels like finally breaking something that might not repair." Ryan said nothing because there was nothing left to say. They had exhausted every conversation, every argument, every desperate reach across the gulf that had opened between them. The gulf that had started months before the party, with missed dates and forgotten promises, and two people slowly becoming strangers. By the third week, Sienna had stopped trying. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, like someone already gone. Her therapist had increased her sessions to 3 times weekly. Her mother called Ryan, asking if everything was all right, if maybe he was being too hard on her, if maybe he should consider that his wife was a victim and deserved compassion rather than interrogation. Meanwhile, a name emerged from the darkness. During a late-night conversation with her friend Katie, Sienna suddenly went very still. Katie mentioned that she had seen Marcus Chen talking intensely with someone at the party.
someone from Sienna's past, someone named David Winters, an ex-boyfriend from college who had apparently shown up unexpectedly as a +1 to someone else on the guest list. David Winters, the name hit Ryan like a physical blow. A man he had heard about but never met. A man Sienna had dated for 3 years before they met. A man who had wanted to marry her. A man whom she had broken up with brutally over the phone after meeting Ryan at that rooftop party years ago. That night, Ryan searched for David on social media and found him easily. A successful venture capitalist, living in the same city, married with 2 children, living a life that looked perfect on Instagram. But as Ryan scrolled through the photographs, his stomach clenched. Because there were recent pictures from that very weekend. David had checked in at the downtown hotel on Friday evening. He had posted stories from various holiday events throughout the weekend. And then, on Sunday morning, a cryptic post that simply read, "Sometimes the past finds us when we least expect it," with a photograph of the city at dawn. Ryan closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of his home office, feeling like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. The photograph of David had triggered something in Sienna when he finally showed her. Perhaps memory beginning to surface, or perhaps something worse. Perhaps recognition of a man she had pushed away years ago, suddenly resurfacing in her life at the exact moment when her marriage was weakest. The educational revelation of this section became increasingly clear. Relationships crumble not always from a single dramatic betrayal, but from the accumulated weight of small neglects. Sienna had felt invisible for months, and David represented something that Ryan had stopped providing: attention, presence, desire. In her darkest moment, made vulnerable by alcohol and loneliness, she had been susceptible. To what exactly remained terrifyingly unclear. But the answer lay somewhere between innocence and guilt, and that ambiguity would prove far more destructive than certainty ever could.
It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in an email from Jennifer, the woman who had taken the original photograph. The subject line simply read, "I found something." Jennifer had been sorting through old videos on her backup drive when she discovered a file labeled Party Night, a video taken from her phone that she had apparently recorded but never reviewed. The footage was choppy and amateur shot while she danced, but parts of it were devastatingly clear. The video showed David Winters pulling Sienna gently but firmly down a hallway near the kitchen area, his hand on the small of her back, his mouth close to her ear, whispering something that made her tilt her head back and smile. That smile, the one that had haunted Ryan for weeks. But what happened next in the video was neither clearly innocent nor clearly guilty. David led her into what appeared to be a private library off the main hallway, and the video cut to audio only. Muffled voices. First, Sienna, excited, saying something about how much she had missed him, how David had always understood her in ways that, how she felt so alone, how Ryan did not see her anymore. Then David whispered, responding that he had never stopped seeing her, that she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever known. Then sounds that could have been kissing, or could have been something worse, or could have been simply 2 people reconnecting with their mouths the way people do when years of history suddenly collapse into a single moment. Then more talking, then nothing but the sound of breathing. The video lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds, and it explained nothing and explained everything all at once. Ryan watched it alone in his office with the door closed. He watched it 17 times, his hands shaking, his breath coming in short gasps. This was the evidence he had been seeking, but it provided no actual answers. Was she assaulted? Was she unfaithful? Was she both? Were either of them responsible, given her questionable state of intoxication, given her emotional fragility, given the fact that David had deliberately sought her out? He did not watch the video again that evening. Instead, he sat in darkness until Sienna came home from her therapy session. She knew immediately something had shifted. She knew the way people do when the ground beneath them has fundamentally changed. "Ryan, what is it? What happened?" He showed her the video without preamble, without warning, without mercy. Sienna watched in silence, her face moving through expressions of shock and horror and recognition and shame. Her hand covered her mouth. "I remember now. I remember the hallway. I remember him saying my name the way he used to say it. I remember feeling wanted. And I remember that feeling was so intoxicating I barely noticed how much I had drunk. I remember his hands. I remember my own hands. I remember." She stopped and could not continue. Ryan, voice trembling. "What do you remember? About the rest? About what happened?" Sienna, crying. "We kissed for a while. A long time. He wanted more, and I think I wanted it too. But then something shifted. Something in my memory is still blank, but I remember pulling back. I remember telling him no. I remember that very clearly. I said no, and he stopped immediately. He was not angry. He just held me while I cried. I cried for you, Ryan. I cried because I realized in that moment that I had almost destroyed us, that I had almost betrayed you, that I had already betrayed you in my heart, even if my body had not completely betrayed you." They stood in their living room, bathed in the late afternoon light that came through the windows, and neither of them knew how to move forward, how to process a betrayal that was incomplete, how to forgive something that was not quite infidelity, but was certainly not fidelity, how to rebuild from an event that existed in the murky gray space between consent and coercion, between choice and circumstance, between right and wrong.
6 months had passed. The apartment still felt different, but it no longer felt like a war zone. It felt more like a place where two people had fought for something and were still not entirely certain they had won. Sienna had increased her therapy to twice weekly, and Ryan had joined her for couple sessions on Thursday evenings. They had learned to talk again, but differently, with more caution, with more honesty, with less assumption about what the other person was thinking or feeling. David Winters had moved away. He had faced no legal consequences because Sienna could not bring herself to pursue charges. What exactly would she charge him with? She had kissed him back. She had wanted him in that moment, even if that moment had been fueled by alcohol and loneliness and a marriage that had stopped nourishing her emotionally. She had chosen to step into that hallway with him, even if her judgment was compromised. But that was the terrible truth that emerged from everything. The responsibility could not be neatly divided. It was not purely his fault for taking advantage of her vulnerability, and it was not purely her fault for drinking too much and stepping into a hallway with an ex. It was both, and it was neither, and it existed in a space where certainty could never quite take root. Ryan had learned something too, that his own distance, his own focus on work, his own failure to see his wife when she was slowly disappearing had created the conditions for that night to occur. He had not caused it, but he had not prevented it either. He had simply abdicated his role as her partner, as her anchor, as the person who was supposed to see her. They had hired a marriage counselor named Dr. Samuel, who specialized in trauma and betrayal and the complicated aftermath that followed both. She helped them understand that what had happened that night was not something they could put cleanly behind them. It was something they would carry forever, but carry differently as time went on. One evening, they sat on their balcony overlooking the same city where they had met all those years ago. Ryan took Sienna's hand. "I forgive you," he said, not because she had done something terribly wrong, but because she had done something human. She had sought connection in a place of disconnection, and she had stopped herself before complete destruction. She had come home to him, even when she might have run away. Sienna squeezed his hand. "I forgive you too, not because you created what happened, but because you had made me feel so unseen that I was vulnerable to feeling seen by anyone, even someone from my past. Ryan, I needed you to notice me. I needed you to fight for us. I needed you to be present, and you were not, and I know that now, and I know you know it too." They sat in silence as the sun descended beyond the buildings. The city lights began to twinkle as darkness fell, and in that gentle transition from day to night, they understood the true lesson of everything that had happened.
The lesson was not about a single night, about a blackout, about infidelity, about betrayal. The lesson was about how relationships require constant attention, constant presence, constant choosing of each other, every single day. The lesson was about how vulnerability creates risk, and how that risk exists whether we acknowledge it or not. The lesson was that neglect breeds danger, that loneliness makes us susceptible to poor choices, that distance between partners can be more destructive than any single act of betrayal. Sienna would never fully remember those missing hours. Her mind had protected itself through selective forgetting, or perhaps the alcohol had simply erased them. Either way, she lived with that blank space, and it taught her that some things cannot be recovered, that some moments are lost forever. And she learned to live with that ambiguity, with that uncertainty, with that haunting not knowing. Ryan learned that love required vulnerability, and that vulnerability always carries risk. He learned that you could not control your partner into faithfulness, that you could only offer presence and consistency and the daily choice to see her truly. He learned that his wife was not an extension of himself, but a separate person with her own needs and desires, and those needed to matter to him as much as his own. They did not return to how things were before, because that version of their relationship had been broken long before the party ever happened. Instead, they built something different, something that required more effort, more honesty, more genuine presence, something that was earned every single day rather than assumed to simply exist. The party that had changed everything had paradoxically saved them, because in losing each other so completely, they were forced to choose each other consciously, and that choice made all the difference. They had learned, finally and terribly and beautifully, that love is not something that happens to you. Love is something you choose to do, again and again, even when you are afraid, even when you have failed, even when the past refuses to stay buried. And in choosing each other after everything, they understood that some relationships break cleanly and end. Some relationships break and never mend. But some relationships break in ways that transform them into something stronger, because the people involved finally understand what they actually have, and they refuse to lose it again.